And so the title of this talk is called Differential Reinforcement and Shaping. And, again, from the world of applied behavior analysis, what we try to do is to focus on what we call socially significant behaviors. So we may want to increase certain behaviors for somebody. We may want to decrease behaviors for somebody. The way we often do that is through positive reinforcement. And positive reinforcement could be anything from praising somebody, or if you have a token system in place, you can give tokens, those types of things. One type of positive reinforcement, though, and I used the term before, is what we call differential reinforcement. And with differential reinforcement, all we're doing there is that you're reinforcing some responses but not others. And when you're not reinforcing a response, the technical term for that is called extinction. So it's combining two processes, basically. And you use differential reinforcement when you use a technique called shaping. And the technical definition for shaping is the differential reinforcement of successive approximations to a target behavior or the goal. So one of the things, and again, if you only have, say, a child here for a day or two, that might be a little challenging to do. But if they're here for like 10 days or so, like the group was before, it would be something that could be very useful. And shaping could involve anything from teaching a child to draw within the lines, if they're doing coloring. It could involve appropriate social interactions in adults with autism or kids with autism, and even individuals with drug addiction. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was touring a facility down at Johns Hopkins University, and they have a really big drug addictions program, all run by behavior analysts. And when I was there, I was talking to the director of that program, and one of the participants in the program came in and sort of just walked between us, right? We're having a conversation, cut right between us. And the director called him back and said, I forget what his name was, but Ed, he's like, Ed, why don't you go out in the hallway and try that again? All right? And his point was that's not an appropriate way to greet somebody. So this guy went back out in the hallway, came back in and said, good morning, Dr. So-and-so, and hi, nice to meet you, said to me. And the director said, hey, that's great. Why don't you head to work now? And they were teaching vocational skills. I think he was working on some computer stuff. But there, what he just did, he didn't allow that behavior to be reinforced, that kind of cutting between two people who were talking. One of the things he picked up on, the director, is that obviously drug addiction is a complicated phenomenon, but part of it also involves, even if you get somebody off of drugs, you want to keep them employed in a job. And to do that, you need to have appropriate social skills. And I'm sure there are other things he would work on with that down the road. You can also use this for shaping, that is. You can use this to teach a new skill. Maybe saying a new word or kicking a ball towards a goal. And again, in my experience, I've worked with kids about this high and then like adults who are 6'6" or so. But one example that I thought was really neat, and we were talking about soccer right before this started. One of the goals that the parents had was for this child to participate in sports. And what we set up was one of those little soccer nets, because he's only about 4 or so. And we put a stripe on the tape on the carpet and a ball. And we said, kick the ball into the net. All right? You've got to be a pretty bad kicker if you can't hit a net from like 2 feet away. All right? So he got some praise, tickles, hugs, whatever it might be. And they gradually started moving that tape out further and further. That's another example of shaping, all right? If they had put the ball like 20 yards away or something, or 20 feet away even, the likelihood of him ever making the correct response would probably be pretty low. So you start with something like that. Another quick example of shaping. A friend of mine was a professor up at Queens College, and the women's basketball coach asked her to come in for a consult because their free throw shooting had been pretty bad the year before. And so one of the things my friend did was, again, I think most basketball coaches would work on just form perhaps, but she actually started them about 2 feet away from the basket, had them practice the appropriate form, right? Kind of dip your knees and, minimize movement. And I don't recall the exact percentage increase that occurred, but they went from about 61% the year before to slightly over 70%, all right? And part of it was you started at like 2 feet away, 3 feet away, and you kept building up success to the point where you're actually at the free throw line. So shaping can be used for a lot of different behaviors. And I'll give you another example here. Let's say, I don't know if the kids who are here had any homework, probably not, but if we do get kids and they have homework, one of the classic phenomena is that a child may not do all their homework or occasionally might not even do any of it. And so the question would be, if you're trying to use reinforcement, what do you do? All right? You can wait until a child finally does all 20 of their math problems, but if they're hardly ever doing math to begin with, that might be hard to do. So one possibility might be, if the child even does 1 or 2 problems at home, you begin by reinforcing that. Again, you have to have patience. I've seen parents sometimes when a child will do that. Classic example happened. The dad said, "You need to do your homework." And the girl said, "No, I don't want to." And he's like, "I'll take your iPhone away." And she's like, "I don't care." And he's like, "Go to your room," right? So he gave her a timeout. Well, clearly the iPhone, for whatever reason, doing math was aversive for this girl. A couple things that went wrong there. The parent went right to punishment, right? There were probably other ways he could have handled it. And secondly, when you give a timeout, timeout in this case was probably actually reinforcing for the child, because by the time she got out, dad was on to something else, math homework was forgotten, right? And she went to school another day and didn't do her work. So what I would suggest in a case like that, in the classic line we use in ABA sometimes, is take what the client gives you or take what the student gives you. And if all the student will do that first night or two is a problem or two, super. Lots of reinforcement, hot chocolate, whatever else it might be, but then you gradually increase the requirement over time. So that might be one you could do. Another example, any of you parents? Few of you? Okay. So classic thing, kids, babies, infants, they coo and they babble, right, when they first are born. I mean, they cry too, right? But there's some cooing and babbling. And one of the things you may find, in fact, is that it's often one or both of the parents, they will pick up on sound that sounds familiar, like mama, dada, stuff like that. And what does a parent typically do when they first hear that? They what? Yeah, they get excited. Yeah, it's like, you spoke, And I remember with my kids, my wife is great with infants. She's a nurse and worked at a NICU and stuff like that. I wasn't as familiar with infants. I wanted her to be able to talk and tell me where it hurt, right, or whatever else it might be. So I was especially excited when I heard dada, all right? But the piece of this, and again, the shaping piece here, if I only waited for her to say dada again and never gave her attention for any more sounds she'd make, that's probably not good either, all right? So I would still give her attention, say, "Oh, you're cute," and stuff like that, and she'd babble or whatever. But when I'd hear patterns of sound that sound like mama, dada, or whatever, then you give a lot of praise, right? So parents sort of intuitively know how to shape language, right? Nobody trains a parent to do that, but yet it does happen. And again, that's kind of what we try to do in our field. A couple other things I want to mention. So when you're doing shaping, what you always want to do is begin with a target behavior. So where do you want to end up? So again, if it's a child kicking a soccer ball, you want some distance or some accuracy. Again, think of teaching a child to ride a bike. Most parents don't say, "Forget the training wheels, just get out there and do it," all right? Normally you get training wheels, then you take, at least I did, you took one wheel off, and I remember kind of running behind her, trying to make sure she wouldn't fall. And at one point she said, "Dad, just stop, all right? I'm fine." And I'm like, okay, all right. So the terminal goal there, target behavior, was for her to ride independently. So you set that target behavior. You have to identify the starting behavior. What skill do they have in their repertoire, all right? You then have to select the shaping steps. And I'll give you one other example of how this could work. Back when I was in grad school, I taught this. It was a college for kids class, and they paid me $500, and I earned every penny of it because I think I had 16 kids who were all about ages 10 to 12, and they each had a rat that they had to teach how to press a lever. And it's interesting, kids who are 10 to 12 actually seem to like rats. Something happens when you get into like high school or college, nobody seems to want to hold a rat. These kids are like, oh, they're all excited, right? Their end project was teach your rat to do something really cool, right? I left it kind of vague, all right, what they should do. And so the final day, some of the kids came in and they had taught their rat to climb a ladder and go down a ramp and through a tunnel. It was all kind of handmade stuff. This one other guy had kept his door closed the whole time and told me not to come in, right? And I'm like, oh, what's going on? So day of the big day when they were showing off what they're doing, he brings his rat out, and I said, "What does your rat do?" And he says, "I taught him the moonwalk." And this rat, this is probably the worst demonstration of moonwalk ever, but this rat would go up to the front of the cage and would walk backwards. It would be like that. And he'd give it a pellet of food and then come running forward and eat it. And I was just cracking up. I'd never seen anything like that. And again, this is like an 11-year-old kid. So I started running around the building. It was summer, and there weren't that many people, but I managed to get like 4 professors and about 10 of my grad student friends. I said, "We got a Michael Jackson rat." I said, "It's unbelievable." But again, there's a case of a 10, 11-year-old kid who understood how you shape that up. And when I talked to him about it, and he didn't even ask me, right? When I talked to him about it, though, he said, "I noticed at one point the rat just kind of stepped backwards, and I gave it a pellet of food, all right? And then I did that a few times, and the rat did this. And I gave it another pellet of food, all right? And basically, it's like, before you know it, he's like, the rat's like moving like that." So shaping, and again, if you're a pet owner, you probably use shaping on them too if you're trying to teach some kind of trick or something. Other questions to ask, we're going to do a little demonstration here too. Other questions to ask when you're doing shaping, are you seeing progress toward the target behavior? If not, then you want to bring somebody in or you want to check and see what's going on there. Is the behavior that's occurring now closer to where you want to be? Or sometimes, and this will happen too, and I've seen this before, you're attempting to shape some behavior up, and for whatever reason, that closer approximation is not occurring. And what will happen sometimes is a child will get frustrated, they might cry. Sometimes a trainer or a teacher will look at me like, they're not getting it, right? Well, one of the things you probably want to do then, if you may have tried to go too fast, too quickly, you may have to take a step back, all right? So if you thought that the child could go from doing 2 math problems to 10, but their behavior is kind of falling apart, maybe you have to go back to maybe 3 problems, all right? So sometimes, again, it's always a case of what does the student or the client give you? One of the other things I would mention, too, shaping can be used even in cases of problem behavior. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. And one we talked about a couple weeks ago in here. One is how parents or teachers may inadvertently shape up problem behavior. And again, that may occur, and again, I've seen this before. I'll have parents, and they brought me in because their child engages in self-injury or aggression. And the child will come up to them and kind of tug on their sleeve, and the parent will be, "I'm talking to Dr. Progar," all right? And the child might say, "Mom, Dad," and they're like, "I'm talking to Dr. Progar, all right? Go play with your toys." Well, all of a sudden, a toy truck comes flying through the air and hits one of us or something. That's when mom or dad now attend to the child, all right? So what you've done is you place certain behaviors on extinction, the good ones, and you've now reinforced a bad behavior because they wanted your attention, all right? So that's one. So shaping can actually be, it's typically used to create new behaviors, but it can also shape up bad new behaviors. The other one that I sometimes see, and again, oftentimes we'll use like a token board. And all those are, if you haven't seen them, might be 5 tokens, let's say. And as a child does something appropriate, you put a token on the board, and after they've earned all 5 tokens, you can say, you know, pull your tokens down or something, and they earn some kind of reward. So it could be jumping on a trampoline, or, you know, going outside, or a snack, or whatever, a short video, anything like that. Well, what I've sometimes seen staff do, let's say a child has had a major tantrum, and they're now sitting at the table, and the teacher's right there, and the child is, you know, they're doing a math problem, but they're still kind of like, you know, and they're rubbing their eye and they're crying or whatever. And I'll see the staff member like with a token, and the child's now done like 6 math problems, and I'll say something like, you might want to reward some of those behaviors. And they're like, well, they're still crying, right? I said, I get that, but they're sitting at the table. You got them up off the floor or out of the parking lot, wherever they had fallen or flopped over. You're sitting there, right? Go ahead and give them a token. I'll say, you know, tokens are not coming out of your paycheck, all right? They're free, right? So distribute them as often as you can, right? Because again, the tendency I've seen staff, they're waiting for that perfect behavior. If you were waiting for that perfect behavior, and again, I only saw them for 3 hours and they were pretty well behaved when I saw them. But if you're thinking of waiting for a perfect behavior, you might get more problem behavior if you're waiting too long. So key here is typically, you know, try to reinforce more often and quicker perhaps than you might think. Because again, even if they're not in a perfect state of equilibrium, if you're trying to get them back on task, make sure they know that they're earning. Let's try something here, and I'm going to need a willing volunteer. All right, we'll give this a shot. We're going to do like a shaping technique on some behavior. So before we go any further, one person I'm going to ask to leave the room and be a volunteer. The rest of us are going to have to agree on a behavior we want shaped up in them. And now and it has to be something kind of straightforward. So if you're like, we want you to sing an opera song, that's just not going to work, all right? But it's going to be more like, can you get somebody to touch their head, or, you know, maybe stand on one side of the room, something like that. And I don't know if this story is true or not, but it's told many times in grad school. There was a professor, supposedly, who people liked a lot, but he didn't make much eye contact. He tended to kind of stare down at his notes. And the class decided to get together and only stare at him or only make eye contact when his head came up. And he always stood behind like a big desk, and they wanted him to be more animated. And as the story goes, over a course of several class meetings, he hardly used notes anymore. He was kind of walking around the room, right, talking to people. And they all started laughing, and he said, what's so funny? And they said, we shaped your behavior. So again, I guess my first question is, do we have a willing volunteer? Got one back here. All right. Can you leave the room for some period of time? We'll come find you.
All right.
Don't go too far. Okay. See, we're on the corner yet? Oh, good. Okay. So what would we like him to do? I'm going to give you each 2 of these. I looked for drumsticks, but I couldn't find any. I looked for chopsticks. Nobody seemed to have them except the restaurant. They wouldn't give them to me. So I went to a 5 and dime, and I got wooden dowels. So I'm going to give you 2 each. And the idea is, and these are actually souvenirs here. You're welcome. I got another pack here for you. So the idea is, whatever behavior we select for him to do, the closer he gets to it, the quicker we tap or bang them together. So what may happen, and I've done this before, sometimes people come in and they're waiting for you to say something to them. Yeah. So we're not going to say anything, right? If anything, I might say maybe try some different stuff. But that tends to be one of the first things people do when they come in, is that they want to be told something. So he's got to come in this way, right? If he just stands here, we probably don't do anything. No. Yeah. If he even starts moving, I would do, slow taps, all right? Yeah, but then if he, let's say he starts coming over here, start faster. Yeah, then you start faster, and then if he keeps walking, yeah, then it's like that, and then at some point, typically, it's going to be like, what am I doing? It's something with this refrigerator. We can go get them. So, they're gonna help shape your behavior by tapping these dowels. So the faster that goes, the closer you are to what they want you to do. If you hear nothing, hey, oh my God. Wow. Wow, that was fast. That was great. So that the tapping is, in a sense, the kind of the reinforcer for you. So, yeah, do we have one other volunteer? You want to try one more? Okay, go ahead. Yes. Head down the hall. I'm going to eat the donut. We're not taking the donut. Oh, that'd be a good one. Eat a donut. And here she is, everybody. Wow.
Well, I didn't turn it on.
Oh, sorry. I thought you faked me out. I saw the wrist go. Well, now it's coming on. It's delayed. That's so impressive. That is really good. I've sometimes seen this go like for 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah, yes. Yeah, I remember the one time the poor person who came in the room almost started crying. Oh. It was like, that's not the purpose of this. You know? So, any questions or anything? Yeah, go ahead.
So for the first example, you talked about how you were having a conversation, the guy kind of cut between you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought like the first time you presented, you talked about like negative behaviors and like you just ignored it.
Mm-hmm.
In that scenario, he like addressed it and said, hey, how about you try that again?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know when to like ignore a behavior and when to shape it?
In a case of problem behavior, and again, I'll go back to like a cursing or something like that, more often than not, the response on our part would be just ignore that. You know, it's not hurting anybody. Most likely maintained by attention from an adult, that type of thing. But if you're talking about that there's a skill deficit, let's say, and a person does something, and again, in this case, it was it was rude because he walked between two people talking, and B, never said hi. You could ignore that, I guess, but you want to decrease that behavior and increase a new one, and that's why he had him go back outside in a hallway and practice that again. Right. And again, one of the things I really liked about their program, you know, some drug addiction programs I've seen, they tend to focus on, you know, don't do drugs, and you know, and they give you vouchers or something for clean urine samples. They don't look at what types of job skills do you have, what types of social skills do you have, what type of supports are you going to need, you know, for weeks, months, and so on. And that's what that program is really kind of designed to do. And I loved it. I mean, I'm sure that he didn't look real happy when he came back in and had to say hi, but the director there, he said it's important for them to learn this stuff, because if he does that at a work site, he won't last long, you know. So yeah, I think that would be the key, typically. You know, some behaviors you can kind of ignore. Other behaviors, and in this case, you know, the appropriate behavior, you do want to increase, and then you do want to shape on that. And as I recall, this individual didn't make great eye contact with us, and the director said he's relatively new here, and he's like, we'll work on that stuff. Now, let's say, you know, he's waiting for like the perfect greeting, and he told the guy, go back out in the hallway, do that again. My guess is that guy probably wasn't going to, he didn't seem like the type who's going to take that too often. I could have seen him say, screw you, I'm out of here, you know, that type of thing. Basically, it's one of those situations where, you know, half a loaf is better than a whole loaf. You know, you'll take that. If you didn't provide some feedback there, then yes, that person could have continued to just do that. I was listening to NPR one time, and it was so funny because they said, oh, there's a new addiction facility in San Francisco, and they're having great success, and they're using a new technique called applied behavior analysis. It's like, it's not new. It's been around a long time, but it may have just been that they had just sort of picked up on that out there. A real life example, since we're talking a little bit about drug addiction, my family and I were a foster family for several years. And I forget the name of the program, but it was for kids who were biologically or behaviorally challenged or something. Because again, my wife's a nurse, I'm a behavior analyst, and I think we should be able to manage this, right? The one night I was teaching up in North Jersey, and I got home probably about 10, but my wife had called me before class began, and she said, they're dropping off our first child tonight, and he should be here when you get here. So I made it home about 10 o'clock, and he's like a week old or something, and his mom was a poly-drug abuser. We were having to give him barbiturates, I guess, to prevent seizures. You know, you probably know that better than I would, because he was born addicted, all right? So yeah, exactly, yeah. And cute little guy. Well, at some point, I think we had him about a year or so. At some point, the caseworker or something said, mom's in rehab. One of the things she's interested in doing is just saying hi to her son, even though he's tiny, right? But would you take a call from her, that type of thing? So we began some kind of relationship there. And once mom knew that we weren't going to adopt the child, I think she was a little leery of that, she became friendlier. And one of the things that I thought was really neat was that they had what we call group contingencies in place, and it was only for moms. So it was only addicts who were moms, so it was just women there. But let's say somebody came in and they snuck in a pack of cigarettes. Well, if they found them, she'd lose the cigarettes, she'd receive some consequences, but the whole program then might be no telephone contact for anybody for 48 hours, right? Or something like that. So they had these group contingencies in place, and then they had a lot of reward systems. And I remember at one point they said, mom would like to come out and see her son. Would you be okay if the caseworker came with her? She's earned this. We're like, absolutely, all right? So she came out to our house, and it was really sweet. Mom was great. She kind of had a bad situation, I guess. But then the next one, I think it was, she has a 4-hour block of time. Could you go to mom's parents' house with the child, and they could spend more time together? So we did that, right? And she kept earning, as she kept progressing through, longer and longer periods of time. Long story short, she graduated from the program. She got married a couple years after. Her son came with her, and my wife and she are still friends on Facebook. He's like 17 now, a good-looking kid. And as she reports, she's like, they told me I shouldn't have caffeine or smoke, and she said, screw that. She's like, I'm still smoking and I'm drinking caffeine, but that's the only drugs I have. And they seem like they're doing great. You know, but again, there's a case, it was a complete behavioral ABA approach to drug addiction. You know, and a lot of it was teaching her more, not just her, but all the moms, teaching them more appropriate skills, rewarding appropriate behavior. Now, they did use punishment. I don't like doing something like that, but if that's what it works, and kept her clean for all these years, that's probably a pretty good thing. What we do, and again, it's shaping what they did there. It was shaping over a course of an entire year but it sometimes takes that. So you need a lot of patience sometimes. But it's very effective and great technique to use.